Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Night School. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we hold an intense conversation about the most urgent topics, the most controversial conversations, the most pressing issues facing the world today. And we don't do it the way other people do it. We don't have superficial talking points. We don't do drive-by analysis. No. We have deep, rigorous interrogations of ideas. It is not a podcast. It's not a cable news show. It is a global classroom. And tonight, we are blessed to have a very, very special guest. And I know it's a special guest because I got so many Instagram and Twitter and Facebook tags sent to me about the guest. I announced a few days ago that we would have Noura Erakat on this show, and it is rare that the hype matches the substance. But every single time I talk to Noura Erakat, the hype matches the substance. She is brilliant. She is committed. She is courageous. She is principled. She is a professor with a capital P at Rutgers University. She is also an attorney. She is an activist. She is a radical and essential voice in our global and domestic political scene. And I want to welcome my friend, my colleague, Noura Erakat, to the show. Welcome to Night School.
Hey, Mark. Thank you. That's a very generous introduction.
It's all true, though. You know, a lot of times when it's people who don't deserve it, I just say, "Here's Jim, y'all."
Nobody's gonna come back to the program in that way. No, I think it's really nice to be in conversation with you and to know that this conversation between us has been consistent and has long preceded moments of crises. So to continue, like, what have we been thinking about? How do we think about them now? What does it look like? So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's right. And for those that don't know, Noura and I have been friends for a long time. We've written together. We think together all the time. We like to dork out together. We really be nerds on all kinds of issues. So to talk to you in public in this way is different, but in some ways exactly the same. So I'm excited to have you here as part of the Night School vibe. And this show, by the way, is meant exactly for somebody like you, because it's like, again, it's not the drive-by.
Nerds.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see the comments. People are like, I got my pencil and my notepad out. I cannot wait. I'm like, oh my God.
Okay, wait. Then I want to just listen to the audience. You know, I am like we are truly nerds. And what does it mean? It just means like you want to keep learning, and you realize at all moments that you just don't know. Like no matter how much you know, you don't. Anyway, so last night I was doing a deep dive just to answer some questions for myself in preparation. I told Mark about this. I took some notes too. I'm not going to share all this. I'm just saying, like, I get it. So I got my pen too, y'all.
That is hilarious. You told me this morning you were making notes about, I was like, I thought you were kind of joking, but I know you will.
I didn't think I was joking. I know you did.
I didn't know you have the full flow chart though, but all right.
It is a flow chart. And I was taking these notes last night as I just, I ask myself questions and then I let them take me where they go. And so I think I'm looking forward to having this conversation and maybe in arguing with ourselves.
Oh, we definitely don't have an argument with ourselves because that's what we do. The first thing though that I want to ask you about, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but it's sort of the elephant in the room, is the Green Party situation. You made some buzz the last couple of weeks in your engagement with the Green Party and the possibility of a run.
Yeah.
And we discussed it here on Night School already. We tried to give it the coverage and the fairness that it deserved, but nothing is like hearing it directly from the person. So what?
Well, I think a lot of things happened, and so much of the conversation is not necessarily, we're not. I don't think ready to have the whole conversation right now, and not for nothing. I just think that so much of it gets into details that might distract us from keeping our eye on the prize, right? And our eye right now, and our challenge is to end a genocide now on day 326. And so that is the primary focus. The long and the short of it is I was tapped, as you mentioned on your program, to be on the vice presidential ticket. I did take it seriously and talk to a lot of people. For me, I've not been involved in politics. I don't necessarily have political ambitions. It's not something that I mapped out, nor is it something that in the aftermath of this election, I knew that I was going to clear my time to continue to build the Green Party. And that's what, I kind of take my commitment seriously. And so for me, it wouldn't have been a 3-month project. It would have been a multi-year project.
Right.
Knowing that I wasn't going to be able to put those many years in because I have other projects right now underway, including a project that really explores Zionism as a racial, a racial theory of Zionism, and a colonial approach to Zionism in a way that captures this political moment and what so many people are doing. And maybe we'll talk about that as well. But the point of that is to say, I knew I wasn't going to make this a multi-year commitment. And short of that, then I thought to myself, then what is, and in this moment, then what is it that we can do? And, I even suggested other people that were much more politically engaged than me, that have been on the ballot, that do this work. And so it came up in conversation when, under what conditions would I run? And I was very honest and transparent. My purpose and my objective in this moment is doing whatever we can to end genocide and weapons transfers to a genocidal state that is attacking a besieged population that has been denied quarter and has been denied the right to self-defense and has been blamed for their own death through the collusion of nuclear powers, world superpowers, the transfer of weapons by the largest military economies, and media collusion. That's what drove me then to tell the party I would do this if we can shape the campaign, not necessarily for the traditional purposes of garnering votes, but rather for the purpose of what can we do to leverage this opportunity to end genocide. And I proposed, as was put out there, I proposed one way to do it was to use the campaign as an opportunity where we strategically mobilize in the 3 swing states of Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Michigan in order to be the margin between a Democratic victory and loss, and then to offer that victory to the Democrats on condition that they impose a ceasefire and suspend arms transfers. That was it. That's not an easy ask. And the truth is, it would have been, it's almost impossible to get. And knowing full well that it's impossible, my position was, well, if we know that it's never going to be forthcoming, that if the Democrats would never concede this, then we have nothing to lose. But what we do get in a moment where there has been also a lot of tension and fissures between Black and Palestinian communities is making it full well and clear, right, that our purpose is not to punish the Democrats, although I know many people want to do that. I know many people feel like that's what they deserve, right? And the purpose is not to undermine the ambitions of a people who would like to see a Black woman president in office. Our purpose is to use this process in order to compel this party to abide by its duties, both to a people on a moral grounds as well as its own U.S. laws that prohibit it from continuing to transfer these weapons, laws like the Arms Export Control Act, the Leahy Amendment. And this is before we even get to the Genocide Convention, which imposes a duty on all states, including the United States, which is a party in the genocide, to not only prevent genocide, but to punish genocide. So we wouldn't, the purpose then was also to make that clear. That our purpose in doing this is to give an opportunity for this party to do right, knowing full well that they would never do it. We have nothing to lose. Those who feel like, there was something, there's not, if you already think the Dems were never going to give it,
then what do you have to lose? And then the Green Party doesn't become a scapegoat, and Palestine doesn't become an scapegoat. And Palestinians don't become a scapegoat for a Kamala Harris loss. So it'll be like, look, you had the opportunity to win, as Joe Biden did. This is me speaking. You gave it away by not taking a principled position on this issue.
Listen, I think what other people might not be taking into consideration is what it's like to be a Palestinian right now, to hold this government to account, that we have every right to hold to account, right? When we are not seen and we are gaslit and we are attacked and we are maligned and our students have their diplomas revoked and are attacked by the police merely for demanding that they not slaughter children in our name and with our taxes. And people don't understand how difficult it is to be a Palestinian in that moment and have that very same party reflect their responsibility and accuse us of being pro-Trump, right? And so what does it mean for a Palestinian then to take the mantle on a third party ticket, not only concerned with building, our power outside of these, really deleterious strictures, but also a duty that there's a lot at stake right now in tension between our communities. And how do we communicate in a moment where there's no room for conversation because of the tremendous amount of pain and the limited room that's available? And so I guess that's longer than I wanted to say about this. The other thing is,
and we can move on. I don't want to linger here too long. I didn't want people to think we were avoiding it.
No, and it's good to get it out the way. And I do think that it needs to be a conversation, and we do think, and I'll say this. Like, you have to, we have many purposes for voting. Folks have many purposes for voting, and I said at the top, like, some people, the purpose is they want to use this opportunity in order to punish the Democrats, and to let them know that there's a price to pay for what they've done, right? Yeah. And then there are other folks who are using this because they are truly, like, for them, it's a long game. How do we get ourselves out of, a two-party system that is not representative but continues to hold us hostage, right? In every election cycle. And then for others, it's like, you want to just vote your conscience. What do you believe in? Some people will just cast a vote because I just believe in this. This means something to me. And in this very moment, and it's not to say that we can't do all of these things at the same time, but in this very moment, my primary concern remains ending a genocide, period. In a year, it is estimated that a quarter of the population, the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, will die. Today, 10 children were amputated. There are massacres on a daily level. There is no quarter for these children. That means there is no place for them to shelter. There is no accountability on the horizon. And we are out here talking to one another oftentimes in these slogans. And I think that we also need to be thinking about what power do we have and how do we leverage it, not only to be heard, but also to have impact.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong, right? And I'm okay with that. And part of doing this work is taking a lot of risk to be wrong in public. Yeah. And to take that risk in public. But I also think in this moment, I would like to see, for example, really creative things happen. This is not a normal election. This is not the year just to try to go out and get votes. This is the time to disrupt. How are we going to use these mantles in order to disrupt these cycles? Like, what is the possibility, for example, of the third parties, of PSL, of the independent ticket, of the Greens, for example, and uniting on a platform? They're all campaigning on an anti-genocide platform. So what is the possibility of them uniting and bringing themselves together to also sacrifice what votes they may have for each of their parties in order to exact these demands that we need? We have to be incredibly creative.
Do you have any hope, any reasonable hope that the empire will yield? Take the electoral politics out of this for a minute. Just in general, when I look at every sitting United States president for the last 6 decades,
Yeah.
When I look at our economic investments, when I look at our political commitments, not just domestically, but the UN Security Council, when I look at every area of our involvement, the U.S. seems to say we are committed to protecting an apartheid state of Israel.
Absolutely.
So and after seeing that, and then I'm not going back to electoral politics, but I'm just thinking Joe Biden. Joe Biden had clear signs that he would do better in the polls if he was even mildly critical of Israel, if he even gestured toward a ceasefire, and he still said, you know what, I'm going to ride this apartheid ethno state thing out just a little bit longer. It's been working for us, right? Like in that context, I'm not I'm not hopeless at all, but I'm also, like Du Bois said, it's a hope, not hopeless, but unhopeful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not hopeful that the empire will cave, even when it seems to be in its interest the way it does with other things. I don't see the interest convergence operating as quickly or as effectively as it does with, say, civil rights or other things. It seems like the U.S. has bigger fish to fry that make it hard for them to relent on its support of Israel.
I'm hearing two things here. I'm hearing like a very, big question of how is it that we dismantle empire? And then I'm hearing another question of what's going on that might make the Palestine in particular exceptional or distinct from other issues.
Yes.
Where there might be interest convergence. For example, right? You're lifting up Derek Bell and thinking about even the civil rights movement, that this wasn't about equality. This wasn't a moral question for Black Americans, but this was, but this instead was an interest of white Americans who wanted to repel or prevent some sort of an uprising and a rebellion, right? So I'm hearing those two questions. So I think that the first one is a really big one, right? And I'm not prepared to answer that question. And I hope that we have a lot more discussions and something will, and I think that answer reveals itself actually in the course of struggle, as opposed to some sort of an intellectual exercise that we can have right now. But it is in the course of struggle that we can answer for ourselves. How is it that we dismantle empire? What we know and what we've seen, right, in the 2 decades that I've been doing this activism is we are not built as a movement, as an anti-war movement, to actually stop war. We have not successfully ended any wars. This is just unfortunate. We're fierce. We're brave. We make sacrifices. We're intelligent. We're organized. And yet we have not successfully stopped war, not in the gutting of Iraq. There was not even accountability for anyone who gutted Iraq on the lie that there were weapons of mass destruction, not in the systematic wars that Israel has launched on Palestinians, where it doesn't, even that's an act of aggression. It has no right to any use of force against a population that's living under occupation, that is using force in order to protect their colonial holdings. And we have not figured out that mechanism. How do we stop war? And the thing that occurs to me most is that the interest of the military industrial complex, right? Of the interests there are so great that perhaps it doesn't matter what we're doing in our electoral politics, right? But instead that there's an economic incentive here and there's a power structure here that we're not reaching. Like I was just thinking about part of this research that I was looking at post 9/11, post September 11th, we see a surge in funding for 5 particular weapons manufacturers. I think it's Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, and I'm leaving out one of them. Well, they continue to be funded at excessive rates, so much that in the year 2020, Lockheed Martin alone, just one weapons industry, was funded in excess of to the entirety of the Department of Education.
Wow.
And this also leads to, thinking about the universities and what's happening on the university campuses, which are basically just an extension of the security state, where these very companies that are being funded in excess of the Department of Education, right? Universities are being defunded by the federal government and by state governments. Instead, they're funneling their money into these weapons companies, right? Those weapons companies are now investing in the universities. They're building the research centers. They're invited, their CEOs are invited to be on the board of trustees and the board of governors of the very universities that have become bankrupt and now have to go to these weapons companies that are getting the share of, this money. Anyways, all this is to say that I think that there are, I thought about this a lot. Like, what is going on when a new CBS poll just pulled, another CBS poll today, 70% of Democrats want a ceasefire, want to suspend arms to Israel, don't want it to be continuously fed. What is going on when you've got this majority of your base that you do not represent? What is going on, right? When you have the experts in the State Department resigning because they are not listening to experts anymore. What is going on when we are submitting reports, like I did with a team alongside Josh Paul on the National Security Memorandum, that basically details the U.S.'s non-adherence to its own laws, right? And we're not even asking them, look, the U.S. sees itself, this is just part of that strategy. The U.S.'s empire, as even the liberals think that they're the police of the world, and that the international law applies to everybody else. And in the words of, former Justice Antonin Scalia, it's foreign law, it's not international law. Even if you pursue that logic, the U.S. is not even following its own laws. What is going on? So there is something quite significant in that disjuncture between all the things that would indicate what somebody would do in a normal election cycle, for example, for their power and how they wield power, and where in fact they're deriving power from. So it also leads me, to really feel like I'm not going to be completely dismissive of electoral politics, but I also don't want to place too much emphasis on it. Yes, it's consequential. Obviously, it's consequential, but that's not where these decisions are made. That's not where the beginning and the end happens in this analysis. It's not, it's me. It's me 20 years ago thinking, if we just educate people on what's happening in Palestine, and they understand the structure of colonized and colonizer and oppressed and oppressor, and they realize Palestinians can't be held hostage for 7+ decades, tortured, raped, sexually assaulted, having their children kidnapped, having their water taken away from them, being removed in the middle of the night and held in captivity and told, you cannot resist. You can't do anything. You can't do anything, right? And so we're a people who are, and I thought, as long as maybe if we explain this to enough people, to enough Americans, they'll get it. But guess what? We have explained. We have 70% of the Democratic base who agrees in this moment. That's more than we've ever explained in our lives, right? We have officials resigning. That's more than we've ever done in our lives. You have the major human rights organizations who have said, look, there's no two-state solution. This is all a ruse. This is an apartheid regime. And here's the legal logic using, staying away from all forms of hyperbole and name calling. And let's just apply the law to the facts. And here's where we get. And it didn't really change. It didn't change. It actually got worse. Instead, we're living in an era where everybody wants to normalize apartheid. This administration has worked incredibly hard under the Abraham Accords to basically normalize relations with the rest of these Arab states, monarchies, regimes. Also, these are authoritarian regimes. Yeah. Right. And now the last, prize for them, and the Democratic administration wants to complete this, is to basically normalize relationships between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And what it's done is basically said, look, we can't resolve the question of Palestine. We don't want to. So we'll just normalize all Arab relations around it and drop Palestinians out the bottom. This movement has made that impossible. You can't. It's just an impossible equation. But it does raise the issue. Like, our education is not, this idea. We just tell enough people. Education.
If only they knew. Yeah,
That knew. It's education. It's all these things that you map out.
They're brand ideals. I mean, but one of those things, Noura, that and you've written about this, is your whole career is based on this. That may be a slight overstatement, but much of your career is based on this. Is this question around the law and international law?
Yeah.
When I travel to college campuses, when I talk to young activists, there's this moment. There's the moment of awareness, like, wait, this awful thing is happening, right? Then there's this moment of, this is illegal. There are laws in place that demonstrate this. International law says you can't do that. International law says you can do this. And I watched them frantically scramble to prove in, whether it's Geneva Conventions, whether it's whatever it is, or UN resolutions. And then there's a moment where the law doesn't seem to matter. It's very similar to Mumia Abu-Jamal, my dear comrade. He talks about the Mumia exception. For decades, when he was on death row, and even now as he's in slow death row, we would pull out all the case law, all the precedents, all the evidence to show why he should be exonerated, why he should be released. And they'd say, yeah, all that's true, but you still ain't getting out. It was like, except for Mumia. You talk about except for Palestine, like, except for Mumia.
Yeah.
But similarly, we're at a moment where it doesn't seem that international law it's compelling, and it might even be persuasive. I'm just not sure it's effective. Where are you at this point? And I don't know if the October 7th, the last 10 months has changed this for you.
Yeah.
But how do you think about the role of international law and the possibility and power of international law? And I'm thinking in the back of my mind about what you wrote in Justice for Some, which gave me more hope than I had before I read it.
Yeah.
Talk to me though.
Well, I'm not going to do a book talk.
No.
Although,
I guess my basic question, in night school, in this very classroom, there are people who say, if international law matters, and if this stuff is documented, why is it not being enforced?
All right. So I'm like I said, I'm not going to do a book talk. So I'm not going to really getting into the theory of international law. I'll give the short summary of basically saying like my thesis. And the way that I approach law, both as an intellect, a scholar of third world approaches to international law, as well as a movement lawyer, right? Where I think that you have to use law on behalf of movements and not the other way around. The law is not going to save us. The law is, and especially international law, was developed in the service of expanding empire. That is why international law develops. It is to reduce friction between imperial powers as they're expanding empire and access, right, to lands, resources, and people. The fact that it comes to be a site where we understand it in this moment as somehow a noble project, right, that stands in for the equality of states and stands in for the right to self-determination and stands in for the dignity of humans. One, that's incredibly recent, and two, it doesn't take away the structure upon which it's built, right? So then that leads you to think, okay, then does the law matter if that's what it is, and should we dismantle it, and so on and so forth? Maybe we should, right? But I as again here thinking as a movement lawyer, believe that we do use the law not for any other reason except for the fact that we can't escape it, right? It's a dictate in our life, the same way that we don't escape politics. We're engaging in it and grappling with power, the same way that we haven't escaped, capitalism and how that's ordering our life despite the unfairness of it and its inherent inequality in our lives. And so too, I feel that that law is controlling in our lives. We engage it, but we should engage it without any fidelity to it. Right? You engage it kind of like you would any asymmetric conflict where you do not have as much power, right? There's two unequal sides that are fighting. In that conflict, you basically use you turn your adversary's strengths into weaknesses, and you turn your weaknesses into strength, right? Use the law when it can serve you, and it serves you when the balance of power is favorable to you. So the analogy that I use in Justice for Some, which you just put up there is, raise that, the thesis goes, in order to use international law on behalf of emancipatory struggles, it must be wielded in the sophisticated service of political movements. And those movements need to decide when to raise the sail. If the sail is the law and the winds are politics, raise the sail when politics are favorable to us, draw the sail when politics are moving against us, and create a new sail, make new law when we can. When people say, for example, that the Palestinians have the right to use armed force against their occupier, folks should know that was a law that the Third World majority legislated in 1977. It took 3 years in conferences that lasted between 74 and 77, and it began far earlier as a seed that was planted in the context of anti-colonial struggle globally. And what the Third World majority did in this moment was basically to reshift the role of the guerrilla combatant, who was otherwise considered a criminal and a terrorist, and to legislate the right to fight so that the guerrilla was now recognized as a soldier with the right to fight, which means that they could kill legitimately and it not be described as murder, right? And this is where it's legislated in the Additional Protocol 1, Article 1, Subsection 4, is where we can draw on where Palestinians have the right to use that force from this international law that was created, the sail that was stitched, which basically said all peoples have the right to use armed force against alien regimes and against racist regimes and occupying forces. Okay, that's the first part of the question. That's just kind of like a little bit on theory of law, but very crudely. Let me get to the other question, which I hear all the time, and I will be the first, and this is part of the project that I'm working on. There's a chapter on this, right? Completely about how this moment has illuminated how the law continues to serve a colonial function, the fissure between the global north and the global south that we're seeing, the enduring coloniality even of the Genocide Convention, which is only legislated in 1948, when it was certainly the Nazi annihilation of Jewish people and other unwanted peoples as they deemed them, was certainly not the first genocide, but it was the first to be committed within Europe's shores, right? And the way that the way that even the Genocide Convention is legislated is done in a way that actually absolves colonial powers of their genocidal violence.
How so?
There's a few ways that it's done. I'll point out, I think, one of the most obvious ways, or two of the most obvious ways. One of them is to basically make the specific intent to demonstrate genocide so specific that any kind of other warfare that's committed for other purposes, let's say defensive purposes, like Germany, when it annihilates the Namibian, why is this evading me right now? I want to say the Namero Hara. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. But Germany's genocide against Namibian people in the early 20th century is done in the name of self-defense because the people rose up. Rose up in that moment. And so, in that case, it's committed not with the intent to destroy them. Is it the Haro Namero people?
I think that's right. That's not mine.
I saw your light flash. I thought maybe you were helping me out here. Anyway, okay, but let's think of other examples. For example, when the Civil Rights Congress brings their petition in 1951 in the United States for committing genocide against Black people in the United States, right? And cites, all forms of, what is enumerated, like what is enumerated to destroy a people, creating the conditions that are meant to limit their possibility of life, right? And so the United States, of course, pushes back and says, no, we're not doing it because we want to destroy Black people, but there's an economic logic here. This is why there's an extraction, exploitation. They'll admit to that and say that it's not about destruction. And yet it's precisely that continuum between racism and genocide that would illuminate genocidal violence outside of that stricture of intent. And what the Genocide Convention says, and what ICJ jurisprudence has developed, is that the intent has to be committed only with the purpose to destroy and not with any other purpose. So if an army like the Serbian army or the subsidiary forces of Serbia commit acts of violence in Bosnia in order to ethnically cleanse Bosnia of its Muslim peoples, right? And even if they use torture camps, and even if they kill people in groups, and even if they commit mass rape, in order to, so that women cannot continue to procreate or become, undesirable and so on and so forth. But if they did that all for the purpose of ethnic cleansing and not destruction,
it ain't genocide.
It ain't genocide. So that's the other thing that the Genocide Convention does, is it also doesn't recognize that a people that are attached to their land, that removing them from their land is destruction, right? It's saying that you can preserve the people even if you're removing them from the very land that they live on. So that's another way that it's done. And then the final way that the Genocide Convention does this in 48 is basically to say that you can annihilate a political group. You can't annihilate a group based on their religious, national, ethnic, racial identity, but you can annihilate them based on their political identity. But then what about liberation movements that are either racial or ethnic or, constituted racially, ethnically, nationally, religiously, who organize themselves politically? How is the destruction of that political group not the destruction of this protected identity, right? There's a lot of, this is the law. It doesn't matter. But look at what we've done in this moment, and what the Republic of South Africa did in this moment. It used, right, because the political winds were favorable to us, it used this convention, which is otherwise restricted to the global north, in order to, lecture the global south on civilization.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It raised this sail, right? Because the political winds were so favorable, and that's the work of mass movement. And I say this again, I do not think the Republic of South Africa would have brought that case were it not for the millions of people in the streets. They made it possible. Thank you, South Africa, for delivering. Obviously, it came at a high cost, but we made it possible, right? But then they used it in this particular moment in order to make an argument that was favorable for us and found plausible genocide. Now you're asking, yeah, but there's been 3 provisional measures that have been ordered: January, February, May, and none of them have been enforced.
No.
So does it matter? And here I would say, look, I sound like I'm defending the law. I'm not. I'm explaining ways that we can use it strategically. If this is not your jam, you know what I mean? If this is not how you want what you want to use strategically, by all means, don't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of us out here who are trying to work through that. Like, I believe in it as a tool, as a reference point, as an organizing mechanism, as a pedagogical tool, because people generally believe in the law in some form or fashion.
Well, here's where I'm going to tell you where it matters, right?
Yeah.
So here's where it matters. So no, it does not. Law does not have the capacity to regulate state behavior or to punish states. We see that. They're not regulating how the US or Israel are acting in this moment, or Germany or Italy or the UK, which are all, the top 5, top 4 arm weapons providers, right? Yeah. But it's not punishing anybody. It's not punishing anybody, even in this moment of starvation. So what does it matter? I would say that it matters in this moment for a few reasons. And here's a nerdy reason that it matters. What using the Genocide Convention does in this moment is it removes what Israel is doing from traditional warfare. because under traditional warfare and laws of war, and this is what a lot of apologists are trying to do, even those who are sympathetic to Palestinians will want to stay here, want to insist that Israel had to respond to Hamas, and this is what it needs to do, and it just has to fight in a different way, right? And so what those people do by fighting on the grounds of laws of war is fighting on moving ground. That ground is not going to stay still. That ground is going like this. There is nothing that they can hold on to. Israel is literally shrinking the category of who counts as a Palestinian civilian so that they can kill more Palestinians and say that they weren't even collateral damage. They can say that they were targets, right? They are also changing what counts, and they're also changing what counts as military advantage. So laws of war have two primary principles. It is the principle of distinction and the principle of proportionality. The principle of distinction obligates a state or a belligerent, any belligerent, non-state belligerents as well, to distinguish between civilians and combatants, as well as non-combatants. But let's just keep it on civilians and combatants. Well, if you don't recognize any of the civilians as civilians, which this is what I mean by shrinking, then you can kill a lot more and still say that you're abiding by, principle of distinction. What about proportionality? Proportionality stipulates that the force that a belligerent uses must be commensurate to the military advantage to be achieved, so that harm to civilians and civilian infrastructure has to be balanced against the military advantage. That military advantage should be calculated by each operation. So in that case, it should mean, right, that in every operation where Israel is targeting a Hamas combatant, which anyway, but let's see, that's what they're saying, right? We want to target this Hamas combatant. This Hamas combatant was hiding in the civilian area behind a refugee tent, and so
if they even concede that it was a civilian area, oftentimes they say it was a Hamas command center
with zero proof, and nobody's even. But and then they say they're going to use a GBU-39, which incinerates everything around them. Right? These are 2,000-pound bombs, right? For one supposed, and in most cases there isn't even a target, but they'll say that if there's one supposed, that on its face is disproportionate. Well, what Israel did in November 2023 is to amend its laws of war to say that its battle in this moment is unprecedented, which is just trash. It's just lying to people. All national liberation warfare has happened in similar contexts of dense urban populations and guerrilla combat. That is why, and tunnels. That is literally why you have developed this additional protocols in 77 in order to regulate precisely this combat. The US and Israel remain outstanding objectors to it. They never signed it. They do not recognize it, and then are now telling the world, right, that this law, that this is unprecedented, and so they can't abide by this law. They need to have the latitude to create their own law. And what do they say in their new laws? They say that the military advantage should not be determined based on each operation, but instead as a whole. Which means for them, however much harm it takes in order to achieve their overall purpose of destroying Hamas, right? It's a complete misread, and it's a deliberate misread that expands how much force Israel can use. This is the violence of the law, and this is why we can't abandon this front, because you want to push back on a legal logic that is only used to push back on violence. Now, who's pushed back on it? The Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, comes to mind forefront, right? Salute to her and her team, which submits their report to the Human Rights Council that basically says Israel is basically amending these laws of war to become the laws of genocide.
Right.
Rewritten all these laws in order to commit genocide, even if they're trying, even if you do take them seriously. But what did South Africa do? I'm sorry, this is so long-winded. And I said,
we're loving this. Please keep going.
But the reason so what does South Africa do? They say, no, we're not even going to engage with these new laws of war. What we want to do is move all together and call it by its name. This is a genocide. We will no longer evaluate each military, operation. We will no longer evaluate the means and methods of warfare. We will no longer evaluate who you called a civilian and who you called a combatant. The purpose of your operation is illegitimate because the purpose of it is to destroy the Palestinian people.
How do you square that? I'm just thinking what the other side is going to argue in the context of October 7th.
How do you mean?
Well, because is it not an easier, and let me be clear, it is a genocide. That is their goal. I have no doubt.
Yeah, no, I
need to say that for the audience sometimes, or the trolls. But in the context of October 7th, Israel always has the opportunity to say, whatever you think of how we treated Palestinian people, we've never done anything of this scale or proportion until we were attacked. Therefore, this is defense. Even if you think it's a matter of proportion, even if you think we have violated laws of proportionality in terms of the mens rea, in terms of the guilty mind here, we have actually we're actually attempting to respond to something as opposed to initiating or prosecuting a genocide. How should we respond to that argument?
So there's a legal way to respond to that, and then there's just the easiest way to respond to it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Genocide is not a legitimate form of combat. Period. End. Stop.
So even if that's very helpful to the.
And I'm going to give you the legal argument to debunk their arguments as well.
Please do, because that's a place that a lot of people find themselves stuck where they feel like they now have to make a moral judgment about Hamas in order to make an argument, or in order to adjudicate this argument about whether or not Israel is legally justified or whether or not Israel is committing genocide as such, because they were responding, because it was a response to something as opposed to the initial act. And I know that's complex too, but that's the argument that a lot of people find themselves in, and and it's like, we know it's wrong, but we don't have the language to necessarily push back because we're not lawyers.
All right. So I think the thing that you should do is get off that ground and get on ground where you're actually on the offensive. There is no reason where you need to be responding to their arguments. That's like just number one. The genocide of the Palestinian people has been steady and complete, and no genocide happens overnight, but there's 10 steps that lead to it, and the dehumanization of a people is where it begins. It is precisely the lack of accountability for a racial colonial regime, also known as apartheid, right? And it is the lack of accountability that has so thoroughly dehumanized the Palestinian people within Israel that has laid the groundwork for an entire society to now support a campaign of annihilation. So there's nothing that happens overnight. It's not like Israel loved Palestinians and all of a sudden felt betrayed.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
Palestinians specifically, those besieged in Gaza, have been besieged since 2006. The perimeter and that siege, that perimeter circumscribes them, began to be built in 1993. It has been occupied militarily since 1967, and the first time that Israel tried to occupy it was in 1956. They want the land without the people, and it is all of 2/3 of that population in the Gaza Strip are refugees who are removed from their original homes within eyesight, right, in 48 lands. But I would just say there is no winning with anybody that wants to say, Israel, they're just responding to October 7th. And then if you really want to get into it, you have to push back and say, Israel doesn't have the right to use force against the population that it occupies. Period. Full stop. That has been rejected when apartheid South Africa tried it. That was rejected when Portugal tried it in its colonial holdings in Mozambique and Angola and Cape Verde.
Clarifying question though: when the forces breach the border of Israel, what is Israel's legal purpose?
Israel doesn't have borders.
Fair enough. There's no established borders. But so then, even because some people would say, well, the warfare that's happening in Gaza would be illegal because they occupy them and they don't have the right to self-defense in Gaza. but what happened inside of what is generally agreed to be Israel is the argument.
Yes.
The self-defense, there is a right to self-defense there. But does that, and my question is, would that, one, is that true? And two, would that right of self-defense allow you then to go back across the unofficial border to engage in warfare?
I haven't gotten into the legal argument of how to rebut their arguments. I'm still
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I just want to say that there is a legal argument to be had here. I think that just plainly, right? Israel cannot maintain an occupation indefinitely and oppress an entire people indefinitely and then claim self-defense in order to maintain their oppression. If people care about Israeli lives, then their primary focus should be decolonize.
Right.
That is why in international law there is a right of people to armed force against alien regimes and occupation, and there is not a commensurate right for occupying forces and colonial power to use their force to maintain their holdings. That is the victory of a third world majority. The majority of this earth has been colonized.
Yes.
And it was upon their decolonization that they led, and through it, right? It was newly independent and liberation movement, national liberation movements that legislated this regime that we're referencing right now, right? So the thing that we have to remember, and you can just say this to anybody who asks you this: do Palestinians control the lives of any single Israeli? Do Palestinians control the movement of any single Israeli? Do Palestinians control their population registry, the amount of food that they can eat, their movement? Do Palestinians control any aspect of Israeli life? The answer is no. The answer is no. And so when you want to ask about why, we have to get to this place of why is force being used? We have to understand what's happening on the ground here. What are Israelis defending themselves against? To them, defense means annihilation, because the threat to Israel is a Palestinian, regardless of what they do. A Palestinian is not a threat to Zionists because they threaten to harm them, right? Or they're going to attack them or have means of harming them. Their threat is that they exist and refuse to surrender their claims to sovereignty. They are rejecting, right? They create a settler anxiety that so long as Palestinians exist, Israelis will always be unsettled, will always be anxious, will always be fearful, right? That's why there is a shoot to kill policy. That's why Palestinians are met with such disproportionate force. That's why they are removed. It's why they are racialized as security threats, not for what they do, but because of the refusal to disappear. And Israel has made incredibly clear that there is no formula within which Palestinians can appear, not within their own state. They've torpedoed that. And if you still don't believe them, right? They keep telling you who they are. They passed a resolution in the Knesset earlier this year that said there will never be a state. So Palestinians can't appear within the state, or as not necessarily equals, but even I'll say equals here for the sake of argument, but even as equals. The only solution is Israelis writ large, I would say in this moment, there's no left, would have a plan for Palestinians. It's permanent subjugation.
Right.
Permanence. That's the only plan they have for Palestinians. They Bezalel Smotrich, developed this plan in 2017 that basically says Palestinians can stay as guests as a matter of privilege, right? They just have to pledge allegiance forever. They can leave or they can die.
Right.
So there really is no formula. Israel isn't even offering a formula, and yet we keep focusing on the threat that Palestinians pose.
It's ridiculous. Let me move to something.
Really quickly,
Yeah.
really quickly. I know I'm not very quick, but let me try to be quick. This idea of the argument. Israel has two arguments that it tries to rebut genocide and says that it doesn't have genocidal intent. It basically says that they are not killing Palestinians because they are killing because of who they are. They are killing Palestinians for what they did. This goes straight to your argument, Mark, about October 7th, right? They're not killing Palestinians because of who they are. No, of course not. They'd leave them alone. But they're killing Palestinians for what they did on October 7th. And the other part of their argument is that, okay, a just war theory that basically says if the purpose of the operation is legitimate, then all means of warfare to achieve that purpose might not be legal, but they are legitimate. Think of the US dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? Obviously, the Nama-Herero people. By the way, it was the Nama-Herero people. Anyway,
yes, I typed that in the chat. I don't want to interrupt you. I typed that in the chat a little while ago.
I don't have it in the chat. I just came to me when I said Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and then I saw where the M stood for Nama-Herero people. But that was obviously illegal. That was obviously disproportionate. That was But because it was seen as the purpose of it was legitimate, which is to save more lives, that would have this is their argument. They would have saved more lives than it by dropping it and ending the war quickly. All right. So really quickly on the first one, any reach into the Palestinian intellectual tradition will help you rebut the argument that Israel is doing this not because of what the Palestinians who they are, but because of what they did. Israel has securitized Palestinians since 1948. And its regime, its military regime, its emergency regime that it applies to the 150,000 Palestinians who did not, flee from the borders. And they apply that emergency regime from 48 to 66. They even use it in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, where they describe Palestinians as using defensive force by blowing up Palestinian villages. And then the genealogy continues. And in my work, I show how they continue to securitize Palestinian, both in military law and in police, and in law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Think about the Gaza March of Return, when 30,000 Palestinians were marching to the perimeter. That was like, talk about the Gandhis that everybody else, where's the Palestinian Gandhi? You had 30,000 Palestinian Gandhis marching. And Israel, not only the snipers were set up the day before, and the order was given, to shoot excessively in order to deter them, right? Yeah. And even you could say, okay, it's a rogue state and it's a rogue military. Israel's Supreme Court, its high court, basically legitimated what the army did and categorized all Palestinian civilians as the exception in Gaza. So, one, this is precisely because of who Palestinians are. And it's precisely why we're seeing an operation in the West Bank, and why we see operations against Palestinians who are citizens in the state, right? This isn't about, this is about Palestinians. It's not about what they do. It's about who they are. In terms of the second argument, all means are legitimate if the purpose of legitimate. Israel's purpose is Nakba. It is defined that its primary way of achieving peace and security for itself is to get rid of Palestinians. It's said that in documents that it's leaked. We saw 3 documents leaked in this instance that basically said October 7th was an opportunity to finish a job. We see it amongst Israel's top intellectuals, like the historian Benny Morris, who documents the removal of Palestinian refugees and says, yeah, this was ethnic cleansing, but rather than condemn it, laments that it's a shame we didn't get rid of more of them. We wouldn't have had this problem today.
Yeah. So
if the purpose is Nakba, that is not legitimate. The only way that you can square this circle, right, is to say that the goal of creating and maintaining an exclusive Jewish state with a Jewish majority, where they can practice a racially supremacist settler ideology of taking a place of another people is so worthy that everything is justified. And that's what we're seeing in this moment. We're seeing the worst, all the hypothetical arguments we've ever made about what Zionism is, about what Israel is doing. Everything that we have said as scholars and as activists, Israel is displaying for itself.
Yeah. I'm also fascinated, and then we can move on, but the extent to which Israel also will make these arguments on the one hand and then do the exact opposite with regard to itself. I mean, to make the case that we're not bothering you, we're not harming you, we're not engaging in acts of violence or aggression because of who you are in terms of your identity, but rather what you did, would be the exact argument that resistance groups would make against Zionist militias, that we're not attacking you because you're Jewish. We're not attacking you because of any ethnic or religious identity. We're attacking you as an occupying force. Our resistance is precisely for the reason that you're saying you're attacking you're attacking Palestinians in Gaza. But when you say that, they say absolutely not. To attack Zionists is to attack Jews, and to attack Jews is to be anti-Semitic, and therefore you are doing the very thing that you're accusing us of. And so it becomes this kind of almost they just fling it right back at everyone in the world. I won't say the world accepts it. Well, the world certainly accepts it. I don't know if the world believes it, but we certainly don't respond. But that's actually a good time to segue, because I want to ask before. I know you don't have a ton of time, and I just want to ask you about two things. One fast, and then the.
Can I just respond to that though, real quick?
Please. Yeah.
Right.
You can respond to everything. I'm worried about you.
No, I know, but now you've got me up. I don't even.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily use the argument in the reverse, right? I wouldn't necessarily use that argument in the reverse and say we're not attacking you because of who you are, but because of what you did in this instance, because Palestinians actually are attacking a structure of oppression. They're not out there, they're not.
Let me be more specific. I probably wasn't clear. What I mean is, when a group like Hamas, right, makes a case, or I think about the piece that Mohammed Al-Kurdi wrote, right? This idea, when there are many Palestinians who talk about resistance in a particular way, and when the language of Jew or the framework of Jew comes up, which I think we need to unpack and talk about in ways that absolutely resist and deny anti-Semitism. But we also have to understand Jewish is a national identity. And I think about Mohammed Al-Kurdi's article where he's talking about, he's like, the Israeli flag is being waved, the Star of David is being waved. People are self-identifying as Jewish as they are engaged in the settler colonial project. And so when I'm resisting, I'm not resisting you because you are Jewish. I'm resisting you because of the settler colonial occupation. So I don't mean a particular. That's all I meant.
I get that. I get that. Okay, no, that makes it really that makes it much clearer. And I think that's and Muhammad's article, I do recommend it for folks. It's in Mondoweiss. I think he's developing it as well. But he recounts the story of how a gang of Israelis basically tattooed the Star of David into a young man's head. I mean, so you have to ask, who is conflating these categories?
Right.
Who is conflating these categories? But the other thing, and here's where I just want to just note a couple of things for people, right? One is, I think we need to be talking about Hamas, because we don't talk about Hamas enough. They don't get to appear. They never get to speak for themselves or their representatives. Certainly, if you don't understand, Arabic or have any access to other, channel, they never get to speak. So they become the evil boogeyman. So everybody's going to agree on humanity and then say, but Hamas, right? And what you miss there, and I recommend Tariq Baoni's work very much here in Hamas Contained, and Khalid Hroub's work as well on Hamas, and Azim Tamimi as well on Hamas, and Helena Koban as well on Hamas. This is not something, they're not out of reach. This is a group with a history that we've seen develop as a political force that begins as an Islamic revivalist movement, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood that wants to, compel Palestinians to understand their condition of subjugation as a result of their failure to be good with God, right? And then it's in 1987, and it's the threat by other Palestinian, political groups and actions, and even within, that push them to take on a national identity and become now also committed to national liberation as a movement.
Right.
Where they are using armed force. And their first operation that they launch it against 2 Israeli soldiers that they capture and kill. And that's when, that's when they become, initially securitized. But Hamas, Israel begins to circumscribe the Gaza Strip in 93, well before Hamas launches its first suicide attack within, what you call, the 1948 borders against Israelis. And they do that after the 1994 Ibrahimi Mosque massacre, when an Israeli settler basically guns down 29 Palestinians who are worshiping at dawn in a mosque. And by the way, in Hebron, there is now a shrine for him, right? And Palestinians are further securitized. The more they're attacked, the more they're engaged.
That's wild.
The more they're engaged and policed, right? And so, and then Hamas doesn't launch its first rocket, its first mortar fire until 2001. And that's in the aftermath of Israel beginning its operations of using aerial missile strikes in order to assassinate Palestinian political and military leaders. This is happening, in response. But the purpose here is to say they are developing in tandem in response to the Israeli use of force. But the Israeli logic, the Zionist logic of removing Palestinians, of engaging them, of subjecting them to permanent subjugation, well precedes the establishment of Hamas. Hamas has also demonstrated itself, right, to be a political actor. It is not, it leaves Damascus and it leaves Syria when it calculates for itself that it will not survive, right, what the Syrian uprising, and either it found itself in a lose-lose situation. Either it was going to side with the Syrian regime against all odds in order to quell the uprising, which would have negated its own calls for freedom, or it was going to side with the civilians and be crushed, right? And so they relocate to Qatar. They're making this is a political group that is interested in its own power as a political formation. And I'm not out here defending them. Let me be straight. I'm sharing knowledge, but it's such an anemic conversation in this country. You want to have this whole conversation about October 7th when the supposed, barbarians can't speak and can't be talked about.
Right. I can tell you as a member of the media, it is literally that real and that true. I mean, if you're a guest, you have to ritually denounce Hamas as a condition of being on air.
Speak.
Yeah. And
here you're going to have a conversation like you're having about October 7th when you already can't speak.
Right. And as the media guides for typically, at least in the international context, when we talk about groups, we tend not to use the word terrorist. We tend to use words like political organization, political movement, radical organization. We try not to call balls and strikes on who and what is a terrorist, because that becomes very problematic. But after October 7th, many media organizations were instructed that we have to use the word terrorism to talk about Hamas. And it's not even a question at a certain level whether you think Hamas is a terrorist group or not, or whether they engage in a specific act of terrorism on October 7th. It's the fact that they're making new rules and specific rules for Hamas that I found somewhat curious. And then the last piece of that is you literally can't have. I mean, I've interviewed members of Hamas on Al Jazeera, but that's about the only space where I've even seen a kind of willingness to ask them questions, a willingness to engage them like an actual government organization, like it's someone that's actually administering Gaza, that's running Gaza. It's fascinating to see.
I mean, I just want to, yes to everything that you're saying, and also note that, Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization within the EU and the United States, but not globally. I mean, they're based in, right?
Right.
And the U.S. also bases, one of its Navy fleets in Qatar. I mean, this is, there's a lot of politics happening here. But as you mentioned, in 2006, they decide that they no longer just want to be an opposition force. Now they want to run for office. Now they want to engage the system. And the moment that they engage the system and then they assume power through parliamentary elections, that's when the siege is imposed. That's when the siege is imposed. That's when there is an attempt, to oust them, a funding of Fatah as a rival force, to oust them even before they were never given the opportunity to govern and to fail. We might feel a different way if they were ever given the opportunity to govern and to fail. Later, everybody likes to talk about the, Hamas charter. They amended their charter in 2017.
No one reads that version.
That charter in 2017, they even went so far as to say that, they would negotiate for a two-state solution. They have entered into a Palestinian unity government recently in Beijing. They are in ceasefire negotiations. They are a political actor. And everybody seems to recognize that, except for, especially for those of us who live in the United States, where they have become such an anathema that we can't talk about it in the media. We can barely talk about it in the academy, right? And so now you're having a conversation where you're literally constructed one of the central player right now in a way that can't be spoken about. And
is it worse than the PLO was in Western, represented within Western media in the 70s and 80s? Is it the same? What would you say?
I think that the talking points are the same. And from what I've understood about the 1982 invasion of Lebanon and the way that Western media framed that, right? And this is where Edward Said's seminal essay on permission to narrate comes up, right? That despite Israeli atrocities, what the UN did describe as a genocide in the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, where 3,000 Palestinians were killed, that, especially US media continued to frame Palestinians and Arabs in general as the aggressor and Israelis as the victims, right? And so there they would point out that they hijacked planes, that, they similarly were launching cross-border attacks, that they did not want to negotiate. They were not reasonable, even though the 1968 charter articulates, a vision for a democratic secular state. And this is the work of racism. When a people is spoken about but never allowed to speak for itself. Right. And when we do speak, we're not trusted. When we do speak, we're not trusted. It's the reason that I spent so many years, I mean, less so now, but so many years before, where anytime I was invited to speak, either there was going to be somebody who was debating me, an Israeli who was debating me, or there was going to be an anti-Zionist Jewish person who was saying, it's okay, she's right, you can believe her. Right? But this is the work. Yeah. This is the work. And we're still, in this moment, more than any other moment. And I really encourage people to learn more. I'm not saying, certainly not saying support any political group. I'm just saying understand more about it.
Right.
Because a lot is being said. A lot is being said about this group that then we don't even know about and aren't learning about. And I encourage you, I listed a number of books. I encourage, start there. And read them on their own terms. And
I think that's right. All right. So you're a professor. You are a college professor, a full professor. That's like the highest rank in the university. That's a big deal. And students are returning to campus. And the campuses that they're going to return to are very different than the ones they left in certain ways. We left encampments and 24-hour resistance movements and signs and protests and walkouts. And in a lot of schools, we're walking back into campuses that are criminalizing dissent, that are eliminating the
Yeah.
possibility of protest. One place in particular, and we talked about this last night on the show, is New York University, NYU. They listed a set of new standards. And I'm just going to pull them up really fast so that my audience can see them. Non-discrimination, anti-harassment, which cool. These laws afford students these protections no matter their race, national origin, shared ancestry, ethnicity, including religious identities, sex, gender identity, disability, or other identities covered by law. All pretty standard fare here. They talk about the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VI. Again, nothing surprising. Where it gets interesting is, first, it talks about the activities that would violate the policy. Refusing to work with people or the application of any type of litmus test for participation in an activity based on identity. Targeting someone for harassment based on identity, attire, language, accent, etc. Ostracism based on identity, such as refusing entry to an open event. Use of dissemination of tropes about protected groups, calls for genocide of an entire people or group. That one feels like a plant, but actions taken against someone based on their field of study, all interesting. But then we get to the piece de resistance. It says using code words like Zionist does not eliminate the possibility that your speech violates the NDAH policy. For many Jewish people, Zionism is a part of their Jewish identity. Speech and conduct that would violate the NDAH if targeting Jewish or Israeli people can also violate the NDAH if directed towards Zionists. For example, excluding Zionists from an open event, calling for the death of Zionists, or applying a no Zionist litmus test for participation in an NYU activity, using or disseminating tropes, stereotypes, conspiracies about Zionists, like Zionists control the media, demanding a person who is or perceived to be Jewish or Israeli to state a position on Israel and Zionism, minimizing the Holocaust or invoking Holocaust imagery or symbols to harass or discriminate. When you see this, first, what do you make of this policy, and we'll start there, but I also want to get a sense from you of what that says about maybe where we are in the American academic system.
Oof.
And I know that's a lot.
No. I should have written some stuff down. Let me see what I can remember. Okay. So maybe I should list them and then I'll come back to them so I don't forget.
Okay.
Because one is like, what is this moment that we're in, right? And what does this moment represent? The second is the genealogy of where we're at right now, where Zionism is being crafted as a protected group. And then in addition to the following that is, the third thing of like, this is awful. We need to reject this. We need to violate this in order to demonstrate the bankruptcy of this kind of policy, right? So on to the first one, let me just say that we're in a moment of counter-revolution. So all the gains that have been made, rather than pushing and, rather than it creating the space that we have rightfully won, both through the numbers, the sheer numbers, the protests, the findings, the ICJ found plausible genocide. It most recently found in July that Israel's presence in Gaza and the West Bank is an unlawful presence. You have got, all the times, and this is where the international law comes in. They can tell us all they want, but they're in violation of what the principal judicial organ of the United Nations has said. So they want to come at me for actually being, true to these, these judicial findings, and they want to laud the law, right? That puts them in a situation. This is where you can use the law strategically. Ilmohim, we're in a counter-revolutionary moment where rather than seeing media shift, they're actually entrenching their arguments again. The BBC has literally taken up a policy. I was subject to this earlier this week, and then I saw several other interviews where all of the correspondents did the same thing, and where I had the same experience on the German network DW, where they did the same thing. Even if there is no Israeli on the show, they are literally making the Israeli arguments by saying, they don't push back. Their correspondents are no longer arguing, but no, you're wrong and Hamas is hiding there. Instead, they'll say, since there's no Israeli, we just want to make clear this is what Israelis would say if they were here, if an Israeli representative was here. We just want to make clear that they would not use the word apartheid and genocide, right? So they're casting doubt on the expert that they brought on to their program rather than engaging it. It's a policy that's been adopted. And after 327 days, to still make the argument that Israel is targeting Hamas, when we have heard doctors tell us that they have sniped children, babies in the head, when we have seen polio reemerge and water sources be attacked, when 169 journalists have been targeted, like when there's no safe quarter, where they have evacuated destroyed 70% of residential housing, 88.5% of Palestinians are internally displaced, and they are killed on their safe routes.
Yeah.
And they still want to say that Hamas was shielding. I mean, we're in a moment of counter-revolution. And we need to be prepared for this, that whatever grounds that we won are now being, used against us. And not only that, but now talking about Hamas and specifically what this means and the reason, we all need to be mindful. They're also saying, there's 2 lawsuits already. They're basically trying to mobilize and equate any support for Palestinians is equivalent to support for Hamas, which is in the U.S. context is support for a designated terrorist organization, which is what they're saying is what they're going to argue is material support, which is basically a criminal charge that can get you in for life.
Okay, material support for terrorism is that's not a small charge.
Yeah, and note that you can't defend yourself against terrorism as you might like in some, other, anyways, all criminal trials. Let's not get into that. But we're in a moment of counter-revolution.
And the American University it seems to be right front and center. We saw that toward the end of last semester with these congressional hearings. Here,
I would just point out that the university again is bankrupt and beholden to its funders, and the primary which of its funders is the entwinement with these military, with the weapons industries, right? At AU, American University, I think that they invited the CEO of Northrop Grumman to be on their board of trustees. Obviously, and so obviously there's going to be no divestment from Northrop Grumman. And obviously, if AU wants to continue to receive its funding, it needs to punish these students. This is a crisis of higher education. And one of the things I would emphasize to people, because a lot of folks who don't understand what's happening and think that this is so far away and that's like a foreign issue. And anyway, how come we always talk about Palestinians and there's so many things happening? Like, look what's happening, in Haiti and then Sudan, and rightfully so, and in the Congo, right? Rightfully so. I'm not belittling that position, but I want to remind people that this is a U.S. war and this is a U.S. genocide. I want to remind people that Palestinians are not, if you just ignore us, it doesn't make you safer. We are not the lowest hanging fruit that makes the rest of your tree available. We are a canary in the coal mine. They're coming for you too. And we see that in using RICO laws and anti-terrorism legislation in order to target activists in Cop City, right? Who are protesting Cop City. We are not sacrificial lambs that progressives can drop. We are the beginning. We are the front line.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. Because that takes me to the last thing I want to talk to you about, and maybe the most important thing.
But Mark, I didn't get to tell y'all about what this thing about Zionism. Let me just be.
Oh yes. I'm sorry. Please.
Let me just offer this. Okay, there is a distinction between someone who's Jewish and feels an affinity with other Jewish people and feels that that affinity exceeds a religious observance, right? And they're in community and they believe themselves to be an affinity, and even if to be an ethnicity, and has a relationship, a significance in Jerusalem that they want to, pilgrimage that they want to go, pay or visit or be or live, right? And go live, versus a movement that believes that this land is theirs, because their God said so. And then uses that license uses their also their victimhood, which we have to acknowledge, but then uses that victimhood and that, that divine interpretation as a license to colonize and settle Palestine. And you do not have to be Jewish to believe, to be a Zionist and to believe in that settler colonial project. You can be an evangelical Christian who believes that all Jews should be there so that there can be the second coming of Christ and they can be annihilated, right?
Yeah.
This is a political ideology. It is literally the settler that we saw, threatening a Palestinian man with sexual assault in order to terrorize him. That is Zionism. That is Zionism. And for NYU to say that that is a protected class is basically to say that they're on board with a genocidal project as well. And the genealogy of that is demonstrative of the failure of Zionism to be morally compelling. It is no longer, it has not been morally compelling. And so the most pro-Israeli folks, the most ardent Zionists are basically expanding state power and police power in order to punish, to silence, to harass, to dox, and to create these new laws where we see that the failure to make, Israel, champion Israel, instead they've expanded the definition in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the definition of anti-Semitism to include this class. And we are now seeing its logical ends. This is not good for anybody.
For anybody. And it's stunning. And I think this last point that you just made about it not being good for any of us and how this having implications for the broader kind of public, the broader community or range of set of communities that we engage in, it dovetails nicely with this point you made earlier that none of these things are singular occurrences or crises or systems or structures. They all operate in tandem and in conversation and in collaboration with others. It really does get us to this question of solidarity. And, you have done a lot of work on Black-Palestinian solidarity. You've thought about it a lot. You've written about it. You and I have talked about it a lot. We've written together about it. We've worked together on it. And this moment, this present moment, 2024,
yeah,
particularly in the context of the American presidential elections, but I think there's a broader piece to this too, a broader conversation that needs to happen, has really threatened the stability of a movement that was really re-energized in 2014, 2015. As we've said, it never ended. There's never been a moment where there haven't been Black-Palestinian solidarity movements since we started to see them emerge. But this moment, I'm seeing some things that make me very uneasy. And I want to. You're the main person I want to talk to and think about this stuff with. Honestly, one thing I've seen on the ground, even prior to the elections, is a kind of growing resentment, or at least frustration. I'll say frustration. It's been expressed to me by many activists on the ground who feel like the Black resistance movements, the anti-state violence movements that came post Ferguson and then post Minneapolis have been very explicit and very articulate about standing in solidarity with Palestine. And the general sentiment I hear a lot is we're showing up, we're speaking out on Palestine, and we're not seeing the kind of reciprocity in practice, and sometimes even in rhetoric, that we would have expected 10 years after we were marching in the streets of Ferguson together. And then the second piece of it, which I think is equally important, is this very interesting, strange, complicated dynamic that's emerging in real life, but also very much on social media around the presidential election cycles. I'm watching people who would otherwise be in solidarity with one another now sort of at odds over a presidential election. Do we vote for Kamala Harris? Do we not vote for Kamala Harris? Do we protest Kamala Harris? Do we not? Should we be criticizing protesters who interrupt her speech in Michigan? Should we be frustrated with her for saying I'm speaking and dismissing them as sort of Trumpsters? How do we talk about Black suffering without muting the voice of Palestinian people and vice versa? There are moments where our interests converge because the systems of power and domination make it such. And then there are moments where a Palestinian might say, and I think will say, maybe even I would argue should say, I can't pull a lever for genocide. My personal choice as a Palestinian is I can't pull this lever for genocide. And there's a Black person who's saying, I understand that. I stand in solidarity with you. I recognize that, but there are a set of issues and concerns and conditions that won't change irrespective on Palestine, irrespective of who's president. But my material conditions will change depending on who the Supreme Court is, depending on what's funded and what's not. And therefore, my decision to choose one of these candidates, and most likely a Democratic candidate, is not because I don't care about Palestine, but because I also have to think about this other thing. And they're being responded to by saying you're pro-genocide, or some of the Palestinians are being accused of being indifferent or maybe even outright anti-Black. And I think that these accusations, these conversations are often too simplistic. They're reductive, they're unnuanced, they're reactionary, and I'm finding them deeply frustrating. But I'm also incredibly worried.
Yeah.
Because so much work has happened to build a solidarity movement that is absolutely essential for our collective liberation. So I know I just said a lot there, but I want to.
It's great. It's great. But like each of your questions, especially in the last, 20 minutes,
I know.
Could have been the whole segment. And I just want to say and maybe I don't have a YouTube channel. So I don't, and my nerd self was like, well, we could have just picked one of these topics and got into great detail. And so just to share with your audience, like this is going to leave a lot to be desired.
For sure. And they want her back. And first of all, they're hooked, they're in love. They're like, please bring her back all the time. I'm like, Noura has an open invitation. I know we can't keep her on that. We got to go. But, and some people say they need you to have a YouTube channel. But for sure, I'd love to. I want to know what you're thinking about. I want to know how you're thinking about.
Let me say two things on this. These are huge topics, but I'm going to do a short answer to the first one and then a little bit of an unsatisfying answer to the second one.
Fair enough.
And maybe that's an ongoing conversation that we have.
Yes.
So the short answer to the first one is what is happening, Black Palestine solidarity being destabilized and the lack of reciprocity. I want to just point out that in the heyday of honestly, it was never historically, I wouldn't call it Black Palestinian solidarity. Historically, I would just describe it as, a Black radical tradition, right? And a Black internationalism that located itself in alignment with people's colonized peoples and peoples of the third world. So it was in alignment with Cuba, it was alignment with China, it was alignment with the FLN, it was alignment with the PLO. And so it wasn't necessarily a Black Palestine as opposed to Black international.
Right.
And Palestinians happened to be part of this. In 2014, we see what you and I have described as renewals of that and a return, an analytical return to this particular tradition, which had historically been sutured in an anti-imperial struggle, where there was a triangulation between the United States, the African continent, and the Palestinians. That there was this triangulation and an anti-imperialism that sutured these movements, and I think that it still sutures movements, which is also to say that in the present, and this is the point I want to make, whatever we describe as Black Palestine solidarity has never been an identity politics. It's not Black people and Palestinian people. It's been Black radicals and Palestinian radicals that are committed to anti-imperialism as a primary target. It's not Palestinians, for example, who believe simply that, you know, they want just Palestinian liberation, but understand that Palestinian liberation is embedded in a broader structure that wants to diminish US empire, that wants to diminish all empires, frankly, and wants to continue a tradition that's, you know, captured by Adom Getachew of self-determination that centers anti-capitalism in that kind of project. Not all Black and Palestinian people are anti-imperialists. And so historically, 2014, 2016, 2020, 2021, it has been this radical alliance that really is really the anchor of what I would describe as comprising that, and you know, the Black Palestine solidarity. To the extent that relationships are fractured, 1,000%, and it's heartbreaking to watch. And obviously, some of it is real and some of it is psyop, you know, but it's still heartbreaking. But how much of it is a fracture between our radical bases? That part, you know, is really the question I would ask. Like, how much of it is a fracture of the radical basis, and how much of it was actually built on how much of this analysis was actually grown? You ask a question about reciprocity. I don't, you know, all I want to say is, whatever we do, we're always in debt, especially as, you know, as immigrants in the United States, right? We are eligible for whiteness, you know, even if it's probationary whiteness, right? This is the work of Nadine Neber, Evelyn Sultani, Sarah Galtieri, of thinking about theorizing a racial identity of Arabs, right? That we are white adjacent, we are probationary white, we're eligible for whiteness. There has to be always a constant and a never-ending commitment to Black liberation in all its forms. And so we are always in debt. And that work happens not merely in, you know, thinking about Palestine, but that work happens in labor, that work happens in education, that work happens in abolition, that work happens, you know, in employment. That's where that commitment is, and that lies. So I will never say that, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the tally is, but I'll tell you for sure, whatever it is, we're in debt. We're always in debt. That's what solidarity is.
But let me ask you about that, because I think
The second part, but go ahead.
just, I don't want you to forget your second part, but I just want to ask you about that first part, because I guess I think you're right to some extent that the radical base of our respective communities and movements probably have not wavered nearly as much as the online and public discord would suggest.
Or the people who were never on board, really. Do you know what I mean? And there were a lot of people not on board. There were a lot of people who continued to be anti-Black, and there were a lot of people who continued to understand Palestinians as terrorists.
For sure. I guess what I wonder, though, is, does this particular moment of tension undermine our capacity to build or expand that movement, if people walk away from this election cycle or this political moment more broadly saying, we would have gotten our needs met if Palestine hadn't been an interruption, or, you know, we would have been able to apply pressure to the anti-genocide movement if people hadn't sold us out in favor of a neoliberal corporate imperial cop, just for example. So how I think you're right that the roots of our movements haven't been shaken, but have we compromised our ability to build on top of that?
So, okay, and that gets to the second question, right? Because I think what happens in this is, you know, to equate basically the future of Black Palestine solidarity to how people decide what to do in this particular election. And what I'm trying to do is to disentangle those things and to say, you know, I think we can evaluate them separately. Obviously, they're going to relate to one another. But to start by saying that I really would, you know, just want to emphasize that this has always been, you know, this is not identity politics. This has been an anti-imperial commitment. All right. This is a vision for a shared future, where, you know, Black radicals who believe that there is no true freedom so long as the US remains empire abroad, and Palestinians who are equally committed to that vision, right? And we saw that, for example, in Durham, North Carolina, where there was the only successful campaign to abolish Durham Police Department training in Israel, right? And these are things where you're attacking imperialism locally, and the shared struggle is explicitly shared when you have, you know, these shared targets. Okay. The second question that you're asking is a very, very, very complicated one about the elections and how it's been framed and how it's going to continue to be framed, right? And so one thing I just want to start from a place of frankly wanting to be nuanced and wanting to be complicated about this, that two things can be true at the same time, right? Two things can be true at the same time. This democratic establishment is participating and forwarding a genocide. It is overseeing everything that we're seeing right now is being done under this democratic regime, this democratic administration, right? And so this is not some hypothetical thing that's happening. And
Right.
been, you know, and this isn't even about Kamala being at the top of the ticket, because even if it was Biden, the fact that I think most people are upset that there's not a concerted opposition to Trump and what Trump will mean for everybody in the United States. So I want to also displace the fact that, yes, Kamala at the top of the ticket is making this much more complicated because of the excitement about, you know, having a Black woman in the highest rank in this racist, you know, racial settler colony is. But let's just get it, you know, to the point that we can actually talk about, which is, I think most people are, why are we not getting into line to oppose Trump? So here, two things can be true: that there is a harm that Trump poses, even if there's no daylight between between Trump and Kamala or Biden on Palestine. Frankly, there's no daylight between them if we evaluate it. Even though the numbers of dead will likely be more under Trump, the policies themselves haven't changed. If you want, I'll enumerate them, whether it's moving the embassy, defunding UNRWA, whether it's the continuing the Abraham Accords, whether it's, you know, Trump pulled out of the Iran rapprochement agreement in the Middle East, and Biden has never re-entered into it, right? There is no daylight. They are pursuing the same policy, right? This is going to be a matter of numbers different. But will Trump have a significant impact on the United States? Yeah. And that's real. And that's why two things can be true at the same time. And so the way that I come at this is really to tell, you know, you just can't tell Palestinians to vote for their genocide. You just can't tell Palestinians to vote for their genocide. And for folks, we just keep missing opportunities. There was an opportunity for those who wanted to defeat Trump and oppose genocide. There was an opportunity to withhold the enthusiastic endorsements for Kamala when she was announced. The wave of endorsements that came in without pause, without a second, except for Rashida Tlaib, that could have withheld that endorsement and said, you can have it, but, right? It was this lack of even, you know, trying to do that work. And so this is where the anger is coming. And at this point, you really can't ask Palestinians to vote for their genocide, but you can ask that, you know, you can continue to ask to have the administration that you want in office to end a genocide. And the thing to also remember is this is not about solidarity, Mark. This is about accountability. Even racialized minorities in the heart of empire, the United States, are beneficiaries of empire. Even those of us who live really poorly or really well, we all are beneficiaries of empire.
Right.
The amount of food that we have, the amount of comfort that we have, the choice of education that we have, the amount of jobs that we can have is all predicated on the extraction and the exploitation of other countries, of other resources, of hoarding of wealth. We were the first to be vaccinated against COVID and to have access to vaccines, if that makes sense for people, if that's the closest way to understand, we have an unaccounted privilege by living in the heart of empire. So this is not about solidarity. This is about responsibility. And so there has to be a commitment to that. At the same time, I want to just, I see very clearly and see very much that I'm not, I don't think it's okay to just say that there's no way that any, that you just want to punish the Dems, but that means that you are gonna, do so. You have to do something. There has to be a plan besides punishment. There has to be a play. What is the strategic play? It's the elections are not the beginning and the end. So what is the strategic play? Are we building the coalition to protect one another in the aftermath of this? Are we trying to, to accelerate a defeat of the Democrats in order to accelerate the dismantlement of empire? What is the play? And I just think that we just need to ask more questions. We're not even getting there because we're stopping in the shallow, we're in the edges. And so, what's the plan? And so far there isn't a plan, which is why
I haven't seen a plan. And
people keep asking, people like me, I'm like, why are you asking me? I don't work in a C4. I'm not a policy expert. Like, I'm out here, and I usually vote, independent. And this isn't my field and my expertise. So I'm not the one to come up with the plan, but I can probably ask some questions about things that we need to ask. I also want to point out to people that whether or not Trump comes into power, right? Whoever wins this election, right? No matter how you vote, it's not ending genocide. Neither voting right now, nobody that you vote for is going to secure the end of genocide. That's heartbreaking. And so that's why we have to also decenter the significance of this in this conversation. If that's not forthcoming, then the other thing that we know is it's not going to defeat white supremacists. They don't go away. They're still arming themselves right now. How are we preparing for this? We're still existing in fascism exists for many of us in this society. Some people live free. Other people don't live free. Black and brown people know that. This is a fascist society for many. And so that doesn't go away. Or we were talking about this, Mark. Trump doesn't have to win for 234 of his judicial appointees to still have power, for there to be a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. Affirmative action has been gutted. Abortion has been gutted. EPA regulation has been gutted, right? He can lose, and that 6-3 majority is in place. So what is the play? What is the play? What are we doing? What are we doing in regards to empire? What are we doing in regards to this society? And we get really intense and we want to talk about it every 4 years, but what are we doing? And so I don't know. I'm really sad by this conversation. I'm mostly sad. I wish there was an answer. I wish there was clarity here. The thing that I would really, really, advise people to do is to exercise more nuance, right? To exercise more nuance, to call a spade. Kamala's speech was Harris's speech was awful. Was awful. That's just is what it is. It was awful. She wants a lethal fighting force. That's basically saying we want U.S. to remain empire.
Yeah.
Call it out.
Right.
See, lied on the stage. I mean, just call these things out. Two things can be true at once.
Yeah. And that needs to be it. I got about 2 minutes left. My question.
My God, we stayed on this for so long.
I know. Neither of us expected that. My last question for you is a simpler one. How do you? I think about. I think about abolition. I think about people in our movement, like Miriam Kaba. who talk about hope as a discipline. I think about radical hope. I think about revolutionary hope. Do you have a practice of hope? Do you have an ethic of hope? Do you have an ideology of hope? What role does hope play in your work and in your struggle?
I mean, I don't function without it. I don't function without it. I know I'll just give you an example. I was following the DNC only because it's like study, like I followed the RNC, right? But just, what's the rhetoric? I was following it at the same time that I was also following how Blinken was sabotaging the ceasefire negotiations in Doha at the same time that I, was watching, the worst violence, like more than one child's head decapitated or being blown off. And it was like just this trifecta of misery. And there's no hope. There's no hope. You might as well give up. Why not give up and destroy everything in the process, right? Kind of vibe. Just from a place of anger, pure anger. But I don't like to stay there because then it just means, we're not going to give up. We have a duty. We have a duty in this time to resist. We have a duty to struggle. We have a duty to future generations to lay down like bridges. People are, let the future walk over our back and what we lay down. Let's leave crumbs. If we're not winning in this moment, let's at least leave crumbs, right? Of freedom and liberation and vision and hope. And so in that spirit, I drew on, that's where I got to the point where I decentered for myself, the grand significance of these elections. And I realized that they too will be a blip in the work that we're doing and in the freedom struggle that we're fighting. And, as we overcome it, what I also got hope from is knowing full well that we have not lost our humanity. That those who are perpetuating genocide, justifying genocide, absolving genocide, ignoring genocide, I think have lost their humanity. But those of us who have continued to resist, we are actually continuing to be human. We are actually continuing to believe that there is something for us that we can and survive. And that's what made me feel so victorious in that moment, that we've already won. That as the world crumbles around us, we didn't submit. We didn't give up on that possibility. And the other thing that really keeps me going, Mark, is who am I to give up? When I don't know. I don't know if folks watch follow it as closely. But when you see hungry, injured, amputated, orphaned children, continuing to be present and continuing to ask for the chance to live and to thrive, they certainly haven't given up hope. So who am I to give up? Wow. Yeah, but there's nothing without it. It's a faith. Everybody has a faith practice. You believe in something you can't see and have no proof of.
Yeah.
Although there is proof. We have enough proof historically. There's no form of oppression that's this bad that stays in place.
Right. Empires crumble.
All of them have.
They all have. And that keeps me going.
Yeah, I just think just to go back to this conversation, like as people revisit this, like, not coming out and endorsing one position or the other. And the reason that I don't want to do that, Mark, is I really, really believe people have different reasons for voting.
Right.
So I want to end on that, like folks who are waiting for me to say a certain thing. I just think everybody has a different reason for voting. If you're voting, to punish, and a protest vote, if you're voting to accelerate the demise of empire, if you're voting in order, because you believe in a candidate, people have different reasons for voting, right? Yeah. And my takeaway here is the one thing that I know, you just vote. If you're voting, vote your conscience. Yeah. Vote your conscience. That's the one thing that we have, and you can guarantee. And that's the only thing that, in this moment, that I think is the most clear.
I think that's the most principled thing you could say and do in this moment. In this particular moment, I think making normative claims about, this candidate versus that candidate. I mean, I would say Trump, sure, right? He's trash. Don't do that. But outside of that, I think making any normative claims about these other things, it's complicated. And I've been, and I've told you this off air, and I say it on air, I've just been profoundly frustrated by how unnuanced and overly simplified our analyses are, but also our moral and ethical judgments of people. Suddenly, this one particular political tactic is seen as a kind of referendum on an overall
on somebody's entire character. I mean, I know folks, I know really, really, really smart folks who in their deepest heart of hearts sincerely believe that Harris is going to deliver ceasefire and want to vote for her for that reason. And I'm like,
wow.
I think that's very stupid. I mean, not stupid is not I just don't think that's faith. That's hope.
That's irrational. That's optimism. That's just an ungrounded.
Do you see what I was like? Exactly. That's an optimism, but that's that's also like somebody voting their, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but there is the one thing I have to tell, folks cannot ask Palestinians to vote for their genocide. You just cannot ask Palestinians to vote for their genocide. Do what you want, do what you may, but at least that has to be a red line. Like, how this isn't, we have voted and fallen into line. And other times when we've lived under genocide and apartheid and cold genocide, like slow death and marginalization. All anti-terrorism law in the US is predicated on attacking Palestinians. It's not like we just found out what oppression was. This is not one of those times. We are not in a normal time to ask us to vote in a particular way when there wasn't even, I'm going to be really upfront and honest. I still don't understand how there wasn't a conversation had before those endorsements rolled in. That wasn't about solidarity. I'm not even going to go there. That just wasn't even strategic. That wasn't even strategic.
It was bizarre to watch a moment of, again, rich political possibility, uncommitted movement in Pennsylvania, uncommitted movement in Michigan, uncommitted movement, Arizona, things going on all around the country, energy saying, hey, Joe Biden, we're not making a move until you make a move. All that energy, as well as a kind of frustration and malaise inside the Democratic Party proper, but all that stuff just washed away the moment Kamala Harris stepped up, and it was suddenly like, here's a vote, here's an endorsement, we got you. I mean, they didn't even pretend. They kept saying in their mind, I'm voting for her no matter what, but we're gonna hold this thing not hostage, but we're gonna have a sort of we're gonna leverage our power right now. It was just like, here you go, because of a kind of blind faith that she is going to deliver something that no one in the history of the party has delivered, and that no dimension of her own political record would suggest you be committed to delivering. And so it's one thing to say, look, empire's going to empire. They all going to be shitty on Palestine. I'm voting for this other stuff. Fine. That's your position. That's similar to my position, but if you actually want to leverage this thing to just invest a certain kind of unfounded, ungrounded, immature hope in the moral capacity or political will of a corporate Democratic Party, I don't see it. And that's where identity politics, not knowing that the right wing wields the phrase, but where identity politics does become deeply problematic, deeply distracting, deeply dangerous, and frankly, politically immature. And that's where I get really frustrated.
Yeah, no, I just want to focus on that too. I mean, if people can distinguish, right, it would be more clear if Biden was still in office, and then people can like distinguish the issue of, is this about your fear of what a Republican, president would bring? Is that the conversation? Or is the conversation because what this represents in terms of representation in the moment and opportunity? And all of it is being collapsed, right? I mean, even consider the Democrat, we thought that Trump, increased the military defense budget by 98 billion. When he did that, when he increased it by 98 billion, people were like, oh my God, that's unprecedented. It was like $700 billion. Under Biden, it got above $800 billion.
Right.
Right? Come on. Now, I'm not trying to diminish that there are differences between them. I'm not, obviously there are, but when it comes to military, when it comes to corporate interests, when it comes to, police brutality and, state violence, when it comes to empire, we're not seeing the difference. We're not seeing the difference. And so I'd like to have that conversation.
We're going to have it because I know you're a busy person. Hopefully you can swing back through because we got so much to talk about and we can talk about it forever. I want to thank you.
This was kind of forever. This is hilarious.
You say what?
This was a little bit like forever.
The audience is eating it up. Our family is eating it up. The community here is eating it up. It's interesting because we all love you and we all appreciate your brilliance.
I really appreciate everybody being out here and trying to figure this stuff out together. The struggle doesn't revolve around, this election cycle. The struggle is constantly ongoing. We have to consider, what are we doing on November 6th? How are people building power? What are we doing to build power? What are we doing to protect ourselves? Right. So I hope that conversation continues. Thank you, everybody. I'm seeing your notes now. I appreciate you.
Trust me, there's a million more where those came from. We love you. We appreciate you. And we stand in solidarity with you always.
And me as well. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Good night.
All right, family. That was a show. That was a show. That was a conversation. That was a lesson. That was a lecture. That was a dialogue. That was all those things. Noura is my dear friend and comrade, but she's also my teacher, man. I when she talks, I'm taking notes too. I'm thinking too. I'm over here typing stuff down to study for later. What a dope conversation, man. It really was. I agree with you, Mia McLean. It really was a master class. And I can't say enough about her brilliance and her courage and her consistency. They don't make them like Noura too often. Anyway, thank you all for watching Night School. We will be back tomorrow with another great show. We'll be back next week with another great show, and we'll be back this Sunday with office hours at 9 p.m. live. Just so y'all know, 9 p.m. live. We will have another wonderful guest. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. He is a well-known anti-Zionist rabbi who's going to talk to us about the origins of Zionism, of political Zionism, and so the role that the Jewish community, Jewish diaspora plays in the liberation of Palestine, among other things. It's going to be a great conversation. I can't wait to sit in office hours and learn from this very learned man. But in the meantime, y'all, I want to thank y'all for joining me here tonight. Hit that like button, y'all. We've had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people watching tonight. Please make sure you hit the like button. The like should match the number. Guess we got up in this joint, man. You know what I'm saying? Hit that like button. Hit that like button. Also, thousands of you are watching for the first time. Hit the subscribe button. We do this every night. Not always Noura Erakat. That's a special thing, but we always got great guests, great topics, and great community. Some of you have been watching on Twitter. Jump over to the YouTube side so you can hit like and so that you can hit subscribe. And I'm going to make another ask. I'm going to ask that you all, and some of you have done it, hit the join button so that you can become a member of the channel. We got folk who have been joining all night, starting early this morning, all the way up until a few minutes ago. We got people joining. We also have people who have been giving the memberships out. I hope you know that too. Kime Abuyade Acosta gifted 5 memberships in addition to dropping that beautiful comment that we posted earlier. And then James Harvey gifted 5. Mege62 gifted 5 memberships. Jenny B gifted 10 memberships. In addition, Mege62 dropped this wonderful note that we showed earlier. AJ Starr, we also posted this earlier. And of course, Noura answered this question in the course of her commentary. Omega, shout out to you. Kamal, shout out to you. Boaz, Kim Music, shout out to you. Laura Jean, welcome as a new member. We really appreciate you. Rolando DD dropped 5 memberships in as well. We got a super sticker from Fifi. We got just wonderful comments. We appreciate all of it, family. Please don't ever think that we don't. Osman Arshad did as well. But on top of that, we also had a wonderful gift. I saw Chad drop a gift here. I don't know if my let me see. See if we can pull it up. It's not showing up, but Chad gifted 50 memberships tonight. I don't know if y'all saw that. I saw it. Chad gifted 50 memberships tonight, and we are grateful for it. We're grateful for it, brother. Chad Zichterman is always being so generous with his support of the channel. So tonight we've seen a lot of support for the channel. You ain't got to gift 1 million people, y'all. You could just gift yourself. Join, get a membership. Get a membership to the channel right now. It gives us the financial support we need to build the channel up, to establish a consistent financial base that allows us to do the work that we do every single night here, which is to produce radical media, grassroots media, independent media, Black media. All those things happen here because of that. So if you can hit that join button, that would be amazing. Some of you don't want to give your money directly to YouTube. I feel you. Some of you don't want to make a monthly commitment. I really feel you. But why don't you think about this? I asked you tonight, since everybody's watching before you go, use one of these other platforms and you can make a direct payment to the channel, a one-time payment. Consider it tuition for night school, or, think about it as, I was about to cuss, think about it as a one-time payment for tonight's lesson. But we like to think about it as tuition for the channel, man. If every month people drop something, that we'd be great. And it would give us the financial support that we need to do night school Monday to Friday at 9 p.m., to do office hours Sundays at 9 p.m., to do coffee and books on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m., and to do the classroom and the cell 9 a.m. Sunday morning with Mumia Abu Jamal, our dear friend and comrade who remains in the dungeons of Pennsylvania State prisons, but we will continue to struggle and fight for his liberation as well. We have no choice. It is our duty. That said, family, if you go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, we ask that you drop something tonight as we end the month. As we wind this month down, we need to pay our bills. We need to pay payroll. We need to pay our producers. We need to pay for technology. We need to pay for editing. We need to make a contribution toward the studio. All of this happens. Again, we ain't got a billionaire backing us. We don't have a corporate entity writing a check. This all comes from the power of the people. So I'm grateful for any support you can offer. If you give $1 on Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, just $1, we're grateful. If you give $1 million, we're maybe a little more grateful, but we're grateful no matter what amount you give, from $1 to $1 million. But what I'm asking tonight is that if everybody watching right now were to give $10, if everybody watching right now were to donate $10, we would meet our financial goals for the month. We could meet all of our financial goals for the channel and move forward if everybody watching right now were to send $10 to us through Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. If you do that, it would make life so much smoother, not just for the people who build this channel and do this work every day, but it would clear a space on the media landscape so that independent, radical, grassroots, Black media entities have the capacity to fight these corporate dragons. Again, the corporate media footprint takes up a lot of space, but when you hit the like button, when you hit the subscribe button, when you hit the join button, it gives us a bigger footprint that allows us to get our content out. When you hit the join button, it gives us that financial stability. And again, if you go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, if everybody were to drop $10 right now, we would meet all of our goals for the month. But I understand everybody ain't got $10, so no amount is too small, no amount is too big. And if you don't have anything to donate, that's okay too. I promise you, family, because it's not about the money. It's about liking the content. It's about subscribing to the content. It's about viewing the content. It's about sharing the content. But most of all, It's about studying the content, because that's what night school is all about. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Free to land, y'all. Peace.